Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be a welcome for the next hour. We have with us probably one of our one of our most anticipated guests, Gad Saad. He's a professor of evolutionary psychology at Concordia University and author of most recently The Parasitic Mind, which is out in paperback last month. We're going to have a battle about Sephardic versus Ashkenazi. I want to talk about your book and I want to talk about your upbringing because you and I have somewhat parallel life stories. You were born in Lebanon, came over to Canada in 75, I believe. I was born in the Soviet Union, came to Brooklyn in 78. So, ships in the night. But let's talk about your book, The Parasitic Mind, because one of the things that you discuss in your work, which is I think extremely important people understand, is applying the principles of evolutionary psychology to how people behave, especially in markets and in politics. For people who aren't familiar with evolutionary psychology, how would you define it?
Right. Well, first, thank you so much for having me on. I know that we tried to touch base a few years ago when you came to Montreal and it didn't work. So I'm glad that we finally connected. So thank you for that, Michael. Look, evolutionary psychology is simply the application of evolutionary principles to understand the most important organ that defines us. And that's this guy right here, sechel, as we say in Hebrew, right? So as banal as it should be for people to accept that, evolutionary theory has a lot to say about the evolution of the human mind, it turns out to be a terribly controversial statement to make because most social scientists have operated, irrespective of whether they are anthropologists or economists or consumer psychologists or sociologists, have operated under the premise that what makes us human is that we transcend our biology, right? So biology and evolution are important to explain the behavior of your dog, Michael, and the zebra and the mosquito, but don't you dare say
Right.
that evolution has anything to say about human behavior. Now, some people are willing to concede that most human phenomena are driven by evolution as long as the explanation stops at the neck. So if I use evolution to explain why I have opposable thumbs, that's great. If I use evolution to explain why my kidneys operate the way they do, that's great. But surely it can't be that evolution explains the evolution of the human mind. And so what evolutionary psychology does is simply say, in the same way that each of our organs have evolved to solve a very specific adaptive function, well, the human mind is comprised of different computational systems, each of which has evolved to solve a specific problem: find mate, retain mate, avoid predators, build coalitions, invest in kin. Each of these evolutionarily important problems would necessitate the evolution of computational systems meant to solve that problem. So in a nutshell, that's evolutionary psychology.
One of the insights of evolutionary psychology, which I think people need to understand, is a lot of times evolutionarily, it's important for people, or it's useful, for people to be deceptive, not just people, all animals. Mimicry is a good example of this. I'm not a toxic animal, but if I have the colors of a toxic animal, I won't be preyed upon. And then the next step is, just like George Costanza said on Seinfeld, it's not a lie if you believe it. It's even better for us to be deceptive when we don't realize we're being deceptive, that the human mind has various mechanisms to convince itself that it's being truthful. Because if I'm trying to persuade you of something and I believe that I'm telling the truth, it's going to be much easier for me to pass your radar than it is if I am consciously being deceptive.
Exactly right. And actually in this book right here, The Evolutionary Basis of Consumption, I give so I don't know if you were referring to that work, but I specifically give the example of Seinfeld with George Costanza, where he says exactly that point. Now, I wasn't going to mention this gentleman's name because we had a really bad interaction yesterday. The gentleman, the scientist who came up with the framework for understanding the evolution of self-deception, is a gigantic evolutionary biologist, arguably the biggest evolutionary biologist since Charles Darwin himself. His name is Robert Trivers, and he's the one who offered that explanation that you just gave. It's a brilliant one because until people hear it, they don't realize that that's the reason, right? So for example, if I walk into class and I say, give me some reasons why we've evolved to be such good at deceiving ourselves, and people come up with all sorts of good answers, but never the one that you mentioned. The best way for me to deceive you is to be able to first deceive myself, because you've evolved the weaponry to detect any overt cues of duplicity in me. So if I could shut those off in me, then it makes it that much easier for me to manipulate you. So you're exactly spot on.
One of the other things that evolutionary psychology teaches is that human being, and this is something, it's just really interesting because if you say this in a layman's context, much of the stuff is inarguable and no one argues of it. When you put it scientifically, people flip out because it contradicts much of the information or claims that are made by social sciences. One of the things that evolutionary psychology teaches us is human beings of both genders are very highly status oriented, and that they will do many things in order to increase their status at the expense of other people. In that context, I recently moved from Brooklyn. I remember I was on the subway when COVID was first breaking out. The subways were pretty desolate at that point, and there was someone, an Asian man in his 30s, wasn't wearing a mask. And an older guy in his 50s got up, stood over him, and was berating him. I captured it on my camera in racist terms. Go back where you came from. Even though he was dressed Western, this was not someone in some kind of stereotypical, someone fresh off the boat like you and I might have been back in the day. But it was very clear to me this person wasn't particularly concerned about catching a disease. If you're concerned about disease, why are you getting physically proximate to this individual? But this was giving him as an excuse to assert dominance over somebody else and pat himself on the back for doing so. And I think a lot of this behavior is that it incentivizes, I said this on Rogan, low status people to have a mechanism by which to be dominant over other people.
Right. Well, look, I always tell people that marketing is life and life is marketing. And I say this because so much of what all animals do is engage in all types of signaling behavior. Now, signaling could be authentic signaling, or it could be, as you pointed to, deceptive, duplicitous signaling, right? So when you refer to the coloring of the animal that is not dangerous, but yet is pretending to be dangerous, actually the term for that, also from the evolutionary basis of consumption, is called aposematic coloring, right? So I piggyback on the evolutionary, coloring that have evolved in another species, hopefully to dupe others. So let me maybe break up the signaling story into different possibilities, if I may. So one of the things that I talk about in the Parasitic Mind is the distinction between, which now most people have heard, virtue signaling versus costly signaling. Now, costly signaling is really relevant because it is steeply rooted in evolutionary thinking. So if you're trying to understand why it is that animals evolve secondary sexual characteristics that are truly extravagant, the peacock's tail, that tail could not have evolved because it confers survival advantage, because actually it does the exact opposite. It makes it easier for predators to see me if I have a big tail. It makes it more difficult for me to evade the predators because I have a big tail, but therefore it still has evolved. Well, why did it evolve? Well, it evolved because of sexual selection, because it confers a reproductive advantage to the one who has that signal. And it is basically saying, hence it's a costly signal, it is basically saying, the fact that I am handicapping myself in such a profound way, and yet here I am still standing, suggests that you should be choosing me as a mate. So it's the ultimate advertising neon sign saying, pick me, because I am exhibiting an honest signal, whereas those other fakers who don't have my genotypic quality can't mimic that signal. So signaling is at the root of so much of what we do. Of course, we could apply it in marketing and consumer behavior, as I do, but you could apply it to every domain where animals interact with one another.
So here's a fairly common question of evolutionary psychology. You look at the peacock, you look at the lion, you look at virtually every bird, many fish. In all of these groups, it is the male that is the beautiful one, the one that's attracting the eye, the one that is standing out, peacocking, is an expression. Why is it in human beings, in most cultures, it's the inverse, that it's the woman, the female, who is the beautiful one, who's trying to be attractive?
Well, so no, both are doing it in the human context, but simply using different trajectories to do so, right? If you come downtown Montreal and on a summer hot evening, and you stand in a particular area and you watch the same 18 idiot males driving around with the car's windows rolled down and the music blaring, I can tell you without looking at them that the next car coming is driven by a male. So it's not that women engage in visual-based peacocking in the human context, but men do, except that in the human context, we both do. But you point to actually something really important, something that actually was also discovered by the evolutionary biologist that I mentioned earlier when we were talking about self-deception. And that's called parental investment theory. Incredibly, one of the most profound theories that you could ever hear in your entire life, because it actually argues that if you want to know the patterns of sex differences in any species, okay, You simply look at the sex within that species that provides the greater minimal obligatory parental investment. The one that provides the greater parental investment is the one that will be smaller, less testosterone, more sexually choosy, less extravagant in their sexual signaling. So for most species, you're exactly right, Michael, it is the males that carry that burden because they have a lot less minimal parental obligatory investment. On the other hand, there are few species, they're called sex role reversal species, where every single pattern of sex difference is exactly reversed. So in those species where it is the males that provide greater parental investment, the females are bigger, the females are more colorful, the females build harems of males to mate with, they have higher testosterone. So imagine how powerful that theory is, because with one great insight, you're able to explain the patterns of sex differences across 2 million sexually reproducing species. So this is why, by the way, why, Michael, I despise the argument made by profound lobotomized imbeciles, including many of my colleagues, who argue, but bruh, evolutionary psychology, evolutionary theory is just a bunch of post hoc storytelling. Right. Whereas the reality, the epistemological reality is that it's the exact opposite. Before we actually confirm that a theory is correct, not only do we demonstrate its universality across human cultures, we demonstrate its universality across 2 million species. I mean, there's almost no scientific field that places the burden of evidence as high as evolutionary theory, and yet every moron on Twitter writes, but Dr. Saad, you're not really studying a real field. You're an evolutionary psychologist. It's all fake science, right? So that really upsets me, because not only are you profoundly wrong, but you are arrogant in how wrong you are.
Well, isn't arrogance, I'm not joking at all, but isn't arrogance one very common mechanism to signal that one's higher status and more intelligence than they really are?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, by the way, sometimes people say, well, I met you and you seem so affable and nice, but sometimes on Twitter you seem to be acerbic. Actually, I'm not at all. Most of the times, even when I appear angry on Twitter, I'm doing it with a twinkle in my eyes. Yes, and I'm actually laughing. I'm trolling. I'm just joking around. But when I do get indignant, it's precisely for the reasons that you're saying, which is I truly love people who are well modulated about what they know. When I know something, Michael, I walk around with the swagger of someone who has all of the knowledge to back up that swagger. But when I don't know something, I'm actually very demure. So if you ask me, what is the bottom line about the legalization of marijuana in Canada so far, since Justin Trudeau has passed the law and so on? And my answer would be, frankly, I simply don't know enough about that issue to pronounce a definitive position. What angers me on social media is that everybody is Newton, Darwin, and Einstein. And so there is no modulation of any epistemic humility. And that to me is a personal affront. It really angers me.
I have a background in zoology, not professionally, but when I was a kid, I wanted to be a zookeeper. Right now, I've got 100 species of succulents in my house. Wow. But you just said universally that the the sex that provides for greater investment in raising the young will universally be the smaller one. But what about spiders? In spiders, the female is both larger and more visually attractive, and the female raises all the spiderlings.
Well, actually, that's a perfect example of the theory. So let's push it further.
Okay.
In the case of many spiders, you have what's called sexual cannibalism.
Right.
Meaning that the male spider, who is astoundingly smaller, sometimes in the order of 1/40th, 1/50th of the female, what does he do in order to have an opportunity to mate? He offers himself as a meal ticket. So as she is eating him, he is inseminating. I mean, he is reproducing with her. So from the perspective of the parental investment, there is no greater investment than I can offer than to commit. So you see, it's actually, I love that you came up with that example, because that is the definitive mic drop example of that theory.
I don't know if you'd have an answer on this, but there's some of these things that have evolved, we seem to have no good kind of justification for them, because they seem so counterproductive, and yet they work because the species is still with us. Are you familiar with bed bugs and bed bug reproduction?
No, but here's what I am familiar with. I have a pathological germ contamination fear, so much so that whenever we travel anywhere, and I'm lucky that my wife is still married to me after 21, 22 years, we actually bring all of our sheets. So before I walk into the room, I kind of walk in as the emperor, and I simply say, defumigate this entire premise. And she like literally goes around. She's so lovely. She will do this because I literally cannot walk into the place because of things like bed bugs and the what do you call it, the money shots, sperm shots on the headboards. Yeah, I'm not gonna sleep there. So basically I sleep in a hazmat suit whenever I go to a hotel, even a 5-star hotel. But no, I don't know the reproductive behavior of bed bugs, but you will teach me, Professor Malice.
Yeah, I love being able to geek out about animal stuff with this because this is what I told the story when I was at Rogan. This is why as a child I could never watch Star Trek, because the biodiversity on Earth is so profound, both in behavior and in appearance. And then they go to another planet, it's someone with blue skin. I'm like, look at the deep sea. I mean, there are things down there that like we can't even reconcile our brains with. So bed bugs reproduce by something called traumatic insemination, where the male stabs the female, he doesn't go vaginally, he creates a wound in her side, and the sperm leaks in there, and she gets pregnant or impregnated that way. And it seems like such a, like, listen, you guys have the parts. Why do you got to be stabbing her? Because stabbing is obviously very counterproductive towards an organism individually living, but that's the reproductive system, and they don't really seem to have a good answer as to why this would be.
There has been no evolutionary explanation for that behavior.
I think there has been, but it doesn't sound particularly
compelling.
Compelling, yeah.
Okay.
So let's talk about the parasitic mind. Interestingly, one of the few words that has an extremely positive connotation, extremely negative connotation is viral, right? If a video goes viral, everyone watches it. But like someone has a high viral load, this person, you don't want to be around them. What are some of what I've made the point, and you clearly agree, is that so many of the ideas that are being hurtful towards the principles of the Enlightenment and Western civilization have their origins in the university system.
Right. Sure. That's a great question. So in a sense, before I answer this, I'm going to continue with our animal, behavior conversation, because I want to explain where I got the genesis of my neuroparasitological framework, and then I can talk about exactly your question. So one of the things that evolutionists do is apply what's called comparative psychology, or a comparative framework. I want to understand toy preferences in the human context. I could study toy preferences for vervet monkeys and rhesus monkeys and chimpanzees and show that our primate cousins exhibit the same sex-specific toy preferences that we do. So comparative psychology is a very powerful tool when you're trying to understand human cognition. And so because of that, I was trying to think, okay, well, what powerful framework could I use to try to explain why it seems that so many people in the West seem to be literally parasitized by these alluring ideas. And so that's where I came up with the link with neuroparasitology. So parasitology is the study in the animal kingdom of how parasites behave and how they interact with their host. Neuroparasites are ones that end up in the host's brain. Right, a tapeworm ends up in your intestinal tract. That's a parasite, but it's not going to your brain. Right. Now, the ones that go to your brain end up altering your behavior to suit typically their reproductive interests, right? So in the case of Toxoplasma gondii, many of you, right? The mouse that suffers from it, that is infected with Toxoplasma gondii, loses innate fear of cats. It actually becomes attracted to the urine of the cat, which then doesn't result in a good outcome for the mouse. And so I talk about a whole bunch of these neuroparasites, and then I argue, well, human beings suffer from another class of brain parasites, and I call these idea pathogens. And it's precisely because of your original question about viral memes and so on that I didn't want to situate that framework within the mimetic tradition, right? The mimetic tradition, beginning with Dawkins and moving forward for the past 40 years, memes are simply things that go viral. They could be positive, they could be neutral, they could be negative. But parasitic infestations are typically detrimental to the host in the service of the parasite. So that's the big distinction between neuroparasitology and the mimetic theory approach. Okay, so now to answer your question, why do they originate in the universities? So depending on the idea pathogen, there's a different answer, and so we can break down the different idea pathogens. But generally speaking, what I try to do is say, what is common to these idea pathogens? Why would they be so alluring for otherwise intelligent people like academics to espouse these theories? And so here's what I've come up with. And then we can discuss specific idea pathogens if you'd like. Each of these idea pathogens starts off with a noble cause that we can all sign up for. And then in the service of that noble cause, it metamorphosizes into pure bullshit so that, be damned with truth if it advances the cause. So equity feminism is a great idea. We should all be equal under the law. There should be no systemic reasons why men and women are not treated equally under the law. That doesn't mean that men and women are indistinguishable as creatures, but militant feminism says, in the service of the desire to smash the patriarchy and the sexist status quo, it is easier for us to achieve that objective if we argue that men and women are socially constructed to be different. So in the service of an original noble goal, that idea metamorphosizes into an idea pathogen for that higher noble pursuit, which is an important point to make because that draws the distinction between deontology and consequentialism. Deontological statement is, it is never okay to lie. That would be deontological. Consequentialist would be if your spouse says, do I look fat in those jeans? And if you still want to be married, you say, of course you don't look fat. You look gorgeous. You've never looked better than today.
Or you tell your husband, did you clean the hotel room? Yeah, sure I did, honey. Oh, okay, thank you.
Exactly, there you go. So for most things, we operate in consequentialist world. But when it comes to truth with a capital T, you should always have your deontological hat on. I never sacrifice a millimeter of truth in the service of a noble justice goal, like a noble lie in the Platonic sense. And so what happens in the academy is that many of these idea pathogens proliferated in the social sciences and the humanities originally, because the ones who were promulgating this nonsense, the academics who were promulgating this nonsense, were perfectly decoupled from the downstream consequences of their bullshit, right? The reason why you don't have as many idea pathogens in the business school where I'm housed or in the engineering school is because you can't build bridges using postmodernist physics. You can't build an economic model of consumer choice by using postmodernist econometrics, because that would fail and then there'd be a big slap, autocorrective slap to your bullshit in your face. So, but if I am espousing from the highfalutin ivory tower all kinds of nonsense that has no downstream effect, then I can say all this BS. So I don't know if I've answered fully your question, but well, I think I have.
Hey guys, we all want to make sure our family's protected in a medical emergency. And what many of us don't realize is health insurance won't always cover the full amount of an emergency medical flight. Even with comprehensive coverage, you get hit with high deductibles and copays. And that's why an AirMed Care Network membership is so important. As a member, if an emergency arises, you won't see a bill for air medical transport when flown by an AMCN provider. Best of all, it covers your entire household for only $85 a year. AMCN providers are called upon to transport more than 100,000 patients a year. This is coverage no family should be without. And as a listener of our show, you'll get up to a $50 e-gift card with a new membership. Visit airmedcarenetwork.com/malice and use offer code malice. Hey guys, Michael Malice here. I want to talk to you about a product that is really exciting. It's called Crowd Health. You know, a lot of you don't have health insurance, or the ones who are on have to pay a high deductible health insurance plan. You're on the hook for thousands of dollars for deductibles, copays, and sky-high premiums. That's where Crowd Health comes in. And this is a great idea that harkens back to the voluntary associations from a century ago. It's not health insurance. It's a better way to pay medical expenses. Being in the Crowd Health community can help you save hundreds of dollars monthly and put thousands of dollars in your pocket. Use your app. You find any doctor, almost any doctor in the country, and they're ranked from 1 to 5 star. You scan the bills and you throw them away. Crowd Health takes it from there. How it works is a community of health conscious members who want to get and stay healthy in return for lower prices. If you're on health insurance, you're paying for the smokers, you're paying for people who are morbidly obese, all other health concerns. This is an alternative where 100% of your monthly membership pays for actual healthcare costs, and it helps the entire Crowd Health community stay healthy while keeping more money in your pocket. Here's the offer. You get your first 6 months for $99 a month. That's a savings of almost 50% versus their standard pricing and a lot less than those crappy high-end deductible plans. If you go to joincrowdhealth.com/99, because it's $99 a month, and enter code welcome at sign up, you can get in. It's not health insurance. It's a community-powered alternative. Terms and conditions apply, but it's a great, simple, and transparent pricing mechanism that's customized to fit your needs. You start and stop when it's convenient for you. It's a monthly subscription, and it lowers your healthcare costs. And you could see almost any doctor you want because they negotiate with the doctors to make it easier for everybody concerned. You don't have the paperwork, you don't have the headaches, you don't have to deal with the insurance company. You take out the middleman, and everybody wins. If you go to joincrowdhealth.com/99 and enter code welcome at sign up, you can get it for $99 a month for the first 6 months. Hey guys, want to talk to you about IPVanish. You ever feel like you're being followed around the internet and maybe advertisers know a bit too much about you? Our new sponsor, IPVanish VPN, helps you take back your privacy and helps you become anonymous on the internet. What is it? What is IPVanish? It's a virtual private network, a VPN. It's an important tool that helps you safely browse the internet. You can use it on your computer, your tablet, your phone, even your Fire Stick if you're streaming media. When you use a VPN, your data is encrypted, meaning no one knows what you're searching, what you're watching, and what you're doing, because it's no one's business but yours. And for listeners of the show, IPVanish is offering 65% off their annual plan. It's only $375 a month. Super easy to use. Turn on with one click, and it runs in the background. If you do run into a problem, you boomers out there, talking to you, Dr. Saad, IPVanish has 24/7 support available by email, chat, and telephone. All you got to do is go to ipvanish.com/malice and use the promo code malice, MALICE. You get 65% off. It's the annual plan is only $44.99 a year. IPVanish is the best of the best. It's got a 4.7 out of 5 rating on Trustpilot, and that's with more than 6,000 reviews. Remember, ipvanish.com/malice to get the deal and protect your anonymity online. Not everyone has to be a loud laugh like me. Michael Malice here, underwear model and official hunk. And the underwear company that I wear every day is Sheath Underwear. It is the best. Why is Sheath great? First of all, they've got this dual pouch system. The founder was spending a summer in Iraq. In Iraq, it's really hot there. So what it does is it has 2 pouches, one for one part of your anatomy, one for another part of your anatomy. I'm telling you, the first time I tried it on, I'm like, what the heck is this? I said, heck. But from then on, I wear it every day because it's the most comfortable underwear you're ever going to wear. It keeps you cool. They've got new additions. They've got a bamboo 5. They've got one that's mesh to keep you even more comfortable, more mobile, and more cool. If you go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code malice, you get 20% off. Support the underwear that supports you, and you'll be one step closer to being a stud like myself and Dr. Saad. Let's get back to the show. So you're in Montreal in Canada, which I got to tell you, I'm a big fan of Canada. I've spent a good amount of time there. I think of it like America Junior. It's just there's an earnestness to it, which I really find heartening. But I've been very disturbed to see what's been happening in Canada, as I'm sure you have the last year and a half. I had a previous guest from Canada here, and I didn't understand how a nation of frontiersmen could be so eager to have the boot on their neck. It's just been very disturbing to see. As a professor, I'm sure you have a lot of obnoxious young students, of which I certainly was one in my college years, who you don't know what the hell you're talking about. I'm 19. I have it all figured out. Sit down, old man. Let me tell you how it is. What do you get the most pushback about when you teach your courses?
Well, this may disappoint you. The most obnoxious people at my university are usually not my students.
Of course, it's the professors. Of course,
it's the professors.
Of course.
And if anything, it's the administrators. It's the ones who allow these idea pathogens to proliferate, right?
And mandate it.
And
Not just allow it. Yeah,
exactly. Frankly, I haven't had in my own classes. I haven't had too much pushback, because I'm very, very assiduous in keeping a very clean line between the material that I'm mandated to teach in my courses and any of my public engagement. Now, in some cases, the stuff that I'm teaching in my courses is relevant to what we're talking about: evolutionary psychology, sex differences, and so on. But for example, I won't come into class and talk about, why Justin Trudeau is, castrato in chief. Not because, I'm afraid to do so, because it's not within my mandate to be discussing this. So I'm as much as you might think I'm an opinionated person, I'm very, very careful to draw a line. So a lot of the things that might trigger those controversies simply don't arise in my classes, because I'm so disciplined in maintaining that distinction. Now, that said, I have had students who started off by not buying into the fact that, biology matters and that evolutionary psychology explains human behavior. But usually, if I do a good job, I provide them with so much of a tsunami of cumulative evidence to support my positions that by the end, they're fans. So frankly, it hasn't been too difficult with my students. I think the more difficult thing has been to exist within the academic ecosystem. That's a very, very difficult challenge.
One of the things, I'm reading Deborah So's book right now. I'm sure you're familiar with her. She's also she's in Toronto, and what she talks about is the big differences between the kind of work you do and her sex research and the social sciences. Whereas you're very heavily evidence based. You're pointing at papers. You run experiments wherever possible. In her work, she does like neural imaging, as opposed to this kind of anecdotal stuff that's behind sociology, where, for example, as a Black woman, X, Y, and Z, I experienced racism. Well, you don't know if that person is being racist, even if the person was being prejudiced towards you. You don't know if they're being racist. You don't know if they're being sexist. You don't know if they are just misogynist, or it could be a million things. Does it bother you when you have to, like, how do you approach engaging with people where that is their background and how they would get their information?
Sure. It really, what bugs me is when people say, and I'm not here to defend sociology. I'm not a sociologist, but sociology epistemologically is as scientific as anything else. The problem with sociology, or all of the fields that are now no longer pursuing the evidence-based approach or the scientific method, is that they have allowed themselves to be parasitized by these idea pathogens, right? To be a scientist is simply to apply the scientific method to whatever empirical pursuit that you are interested in pursuing. You could be an English literature professor and be a scientist. And you might say, how is that possible? So let me give you an example. So you would think, English literature, how is that scientific? Well, suppose I wanted to demonstrate to you that there are certain male archetypes and female archetypes that are found in every single novel from around the world, precisely because those archetypes perfectly map onto specific universal mating preferences. And so if I did a content analysis of 100 different novels from around the world, and I applied very rigorous quantitative techniques from content analysis to then test my hypotheses, guess what? I'm a scientist. So the fact that I am housed in the English literature department did not make me any less of a scientist than the guy who was in the physics department. What does make you less of a scientist is where you say, in my discipline, I no longer apply the scientific method. So you've got, for example, autoethnography, right? I woke up today, I had a nice erection, so let me tell you about it, okay? So this is a Dear Diary thing, because, there are many ways of knowing. No, there are no many ways of knowing. There is no Lebanese Jewish way of knowing. There is no former Russian Jew who is now in Brooklyn way of knowing. There is no indigenous way of knowing, as we now see in every Canadian university. There is just the scientific method way of knowing. Now, you could, for example, be from an indigenous society that has lived in a particular ecosystem in the northern parts of Canada, where you have intimate knowledge of the flora and fauna of that culture, of that ecosystem, in which case we might come to you and say, hey, teach us, indigenous folks. But in you adjudicating scientific hypotheses, you don't use an alternate method other than the scientific method. But by the way, what I just said would get me into huge trouble, as I explained in the Parasitic Mind, when I critique the indigenization of the universities. That's insane. That's quackery. That's, dark age garbage, right? And yet we are now implementing these types of approaches under the cloak of progressivism. So how do I handle those people? Hopefully I convince them with the strength of my evidence. The challenge, though, Michael, is that if at least you put out your fingers from your ears and you grant me the opportunity to present the evidence, then I have a chance to flip you. But if you literally do la la la, then there's no way for me to reach you. And so I have to then decide whether it's worth my continuing with you or just walking away.
Isn't this very clearly just a very vague degeneration of Marx's idea of polylogism, where if I'm a member of the bourgeois class and you're a member of the labor class, we literally can't talk to each other?
Exactly right. I love it. I actually discuss exactly that in the Parasitic Mind, right? It is taking horrifyingly bad ideas that through an evolutionary process, right? I mean, knowledge itself is prone to selection pressures in a
Of course,
Darwinian
yeah.
sense. So that's called evolutionary epistemology. So we've already defeated those idiotic ideas. They're gone, they're dead, they're in the dustbin of history. And yet some morons will come out from academia and say, hey, here's a great idea. Let's take an idea that has been completely refuted and let's revive it under the cloak of progressivism. That's what makes me indignant when I react the way that I do on social media, because I truly am someone who is personally offended by attacks on truth. And to see someone say things like, well, you know, there is an indigenous brain and there is a Jew brain, I say, yeah, you're called Himmler, right? I mean, it's insane. But you now say that again under the cloak of you being an enlightened academic. It's insane. It's grotesque.
Let's see if I can make a evolutionary psychology our argument for critical race theory, right?
Uh-oh.
Let's see if I can do devil's advocate. So critical race theory teaches us that the people who are in the power class, which is whites and white males, will do everything in their power to maintain that. But because due to their privilege, they are often oblivious to their own racism, and it is advantageous for them to do everything in their power to maintain their own racial status and preferential power status. So doesn't that exactly tie into what we were talking about earlier with George Costanza?
In that I am lying to myself about my privilege so that I can maintain my position of dominance?
As well as it's very important for me to maintain my status from an evolutionary perspective. So of course I'm going to fight tooth and nail to maintain my privileged position.
This is gonna be one of those cases where you've just given a just so story of evolutionary psychology, but that's okay. Look, what about the guy who's from Appalachia who suffers from crystal meth addiction and who hasn't worked for 6 years, but he's white? Can you explain to me how he is benefiting from his white privilege? How is he playing that game?
He's going to have an easier time than again, devil's advocate. I'm just
I get it.
He's going to have an easier time than if he had been black in that position, because if he were black in that position, he'd be in the gutter. Whereas with him, we at least have his community having some measure of sympathy for him.
Yeah, I'm just gonna call bullshit on that. I mean, I really don't know. It's such a convoluted way of, I'm someone who so believes in individual dignity, as I'm sure you do, that look, coalitional psychology is, so in a sense, I'm answering your evolutionary psychology thing. We are primed to view the world as us versus them, and therefore it's very difficult for us to not succumb to all sorts of idea pathogens that are tribal in nature. But the magic of the Western experience has been that we created a set of foundational values, including the elevating the individual above the collectivist tribe. Precisely, that's what made it so anomalous. That's precisely why the history of humanity is not littered with Western traditions. That's why it is such an outlier. So I understand. So I'm not sure if I can agree to an evolutionary psychology explanation of critical race theory, but I can certainly understand why it is so easy for people to be racist, to be tribal. In other words, it takes a truly unique individual to elevate themselves above seeing these tribal affiliations. So in that sense, it is evolutionary indeed. But we have such an incredible system where we really have elevated individual dignity. I simply can't understand. Maybe you have a reason that I haven't thought of. I can't understand why we are returning to the identity politics, certainly from which I have escaped in Lebanon, where everything was based on your religious heritage as your identity marker.
Well, I think it's a mechanism for lower status people to compete. It's a very easy one, because if I discussed this in my book, then you're right. If there is a magic word that I can say, and if I say this word, you're going to do whatever I want out of fear of repercussions, I'd be saying it every 5 minutes. So for a long time, that word was racist. So if I just call you racist right away, you're going to be back on your heels, and neither you or I are going to deny that racism exists in terms of prejudice. People have prejudices, of course. So then they become Mott and Bailey, right? Because I'll say, you're being racist here, and you're saying, no, I'm not. You go, oh, so you're saying racism doesn't exist? So they do that vacillation between the two positions, and psychologically they feel they're being consistent.
Well, and I would argue to say that, I mean, as both of our hero, he's my hero and yours, Ibram Kendi, has said, if you say that you're not racist, that is a manifestation of racism. And I actually give two wonderful examples of that in the Parasitic Mind, where I have a section, I title it, All Roads Lead to Bigotry. And I've mentioned these two stories, maybe 1,000 times, and every time I mention them, I'm surprised at how lunatic those stories are as I recount the story.
Yeah.
So here we go. Number one, a Jewish Israeli student, doctoral student, is writing a paper, an academic paper, trying to demonstrate that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, engage in rampant rape of the noble Palestinian women. And so she goes out to prove that hypothesis, to test that hypothesis. And to her chagrin, she finds out that there isn't a single documented case of rape by a male IDF soldier on a female Palestinian woman, not one. Now, does she then, with complete epistemic humility, say, hey, I guess my hypothesis was wrong? Oh, no, Michael. What she then argued is that the IDF soldiers are so...
They're prejudiced because they think the women are unattractive, so they're not good enough to rape them. Is that it?
Exactly. They are so othering the women that they're not even good enough to rape. So if they rape the women, they're evil. If they don't rape the women, they're evil. Second example. A student at Queen's University.
Wait, hold on. I got to interrupt you. It's kind of fun where you present the data and then you could ask the reader, how would you resolve this in order to maintain your preconceived conclusion? Like, and sometimes they're very clever.
It's amazing that you say this because I have actually done exactly that. And I don't think I've ever had anyone, answer it in the way that student did. Meaning, which is, I guess, good news, is that most people are not quite so parasitized as to be able to access such lunacy, right? If everybody were able to come up with that, I would say we're in big trouble. The fact that nobody can means that there's only a few idiots in academia that can espouse this garbage. So example two, a student at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, in Canada, wants to demonstrate that Canada is a desperately Islamophobic society. I mean, you can't walk outside if you're Muslim because you're going to be gang raped. And so what she does is she dons a hijab. She doesn't herself wear a hijab, but she dons a hijab. And I think for 18 days, she goes around because she wants to keep track of, how she's been, gang raped and so on. And it turns out that the Canadians were unbelievably kind, sweet, polite, tolerant. I mean, not a single manifestation of Islamophobia. Aha! This demonstrates how Islamophobic they are. Because if they didn't have massive, cancerous, corrosive Islamophobia latently hidden inside of them, then they wouldn't be trying to overcompensate by being so nice to the hijab woman. So the Canadians being kind and sweet and polite and tolerant was an exact demonstration of how Islamophobic they are. So this is not satire. This is not Michael Malice satire. This is not Gad Saad satire. This is appearing as real thinking in, at Hebrew University and at Queen's University. It's not good, Michael.
And if they're really, really nice to her, then it's fetishization.
Say again?
If they're really, really nice to her, then they call it fetishization, where instead of treating them as individuals, you have them on a pedestal, which also dehumanizes them. It reminds me of antitrust law, where if the price is too high, it's predatory pricing. If the price is too low, it's price gouging. And the price is the same, it's collusion. So no matter where you price it compared to your competitors, you are guilty of antitrust violations.
Oh, I love that one. That's a really good one. Look, I give the example because you mentioned fetishization. So let me give an example from the book that exactly speaks to that. If I say, I'm really not attracted to 500-pound women, that's just not my sexual preference, you're a disgusting fatphobe or fattest, okay, whatever. Okay. If I say I am, or I think the term is, I'm going to use the colloquialism, chubby chaser. If you really are attracted, so I say, I'm actually sexually turned on by 500-pound women, that is disgusting. You are fetishizing my fat folds. Right. So if I'm not attracted to 500-pound women, I'm disgusting. If I am attracted to 500-pound women, I'm disgusting. I can't escape the appellation that I'm disgusting.
And I appreciate very much using the correct measure instead of kilograms, which is a form of communism. Hey guys, I want to talk to you a second about Fume. If you go to breathefume.com, breathefum.com/malice, you get 10% off your order. What does Fume do? Fume takes the benefits of superplants, behavioral science, and beautiful design to help make quitting smoking and vaping a bit easier and a lot cheaper. Think how much money you're spending on those things. What it does, it's a device that looks like a steampunk vape. no smoke, no nicotine, no harmful chemicals. They have these cores you stick at the end. It's a design that's handcrafted and wooden, and the flavors taste great and work to curb cravings, ease stress, and improve breathing. You look cool at a party. People are like, oh, what's that? It's like, oh, this is my fume. I quit smoking. The hardest part about quitting smoking or quitting vaping is the ritual. What am I going to do with my hands? What am I going to do after I have a meal? What if I'm doing for having a drink? Want something in my hands? Fume allows you to do that, and it helps you get healthy and well. If you go to breathefume.com, breathefum.com/malice, you get 10% off your order. And there's something called the Quit Naturally pack. It comes with 1 fume and 4 packs of cores studied to curb cravings and get you on the path to being nicotine free.
This is Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Pettisy.
I love hearing people's stories of resilience and grit. This is why I created this podcast.
We are very excited to welcome Jim Gaffigan, Yasmin Mohammed, Glenn Beck, Tim Dillon, Abigail Schreier, Jeff Garland, Ayan Hirsi Ali, Sam Harris, Heather Hying,
Jonah Goldberg,
Ben Shapiro, Glenn Greenwald, Sarah Shahi, Colin Quinn.
If there's a culture of victimhood, then let's tell stories of grit and survival.
Subscribe and listen now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's talk a little bit about your upbringing. So something you and I, my family, and my understanding is yours as well. One of the reasons we left the Soviet Union is because of anti-Semitism. And it's something that privileged, I'm using the word correctly. I was very privileged to experience very little of that growing up in Brooklyn, in New York, but there seems to be somewhat of an increase in anti-Semitism, which I think Americans are just kind of oblivious to. This was very much a relic of the past. What was it like for you growing up in the Middle East?
Yeah, thank you for that.
As a Jewish person.
Yeah, so we were part of the last group of Jews that had steadfastly refused to, leave Lebanon, if not leave the Middle East, because all Jewish communities in the Middle East had, pretty much dwindled to nothing. There was a bit of a community in Iran. There was a bit of a community in Lebanon. So we were part of the last remaining wave of Lebanese Jews, probably in the order of a few hundred to very low thousands. Most of my extended family had already left. Some had already come to Canada. Most had moved to Israel. And my family, though, we were very well entrenched in Lebanese society. And so we were there till mid-1975. Now, in 1975, the Civil War broke out, where, all future butchering is judged according to the standards of the Lebanese Civil War. And so it was at that point impossible to be Jewish. And so we had to leave under, imminent threat of death. But that said, prior to the Civil War breaking out, it wasn't all, rosy growing up as a Lebanese Jew. So maybe that's, the gist of your original question. And so I recount a few stories, but, my entire childhood was filled with these stories. So anti-Semitism, Michael, is the bond that connects everything in the Middle East. Literally, it's not hyperbolic. It rains today, it's the damn Jews. It's sunny, too hot today, it's the damn Jews. You got diabetes, it's because the Jews are holding back medicine so that we don't have diabetes. You got cancer, it's the Jews. Your wife cheated on you, who put those sinful thoughts in her head? It's the Jewish neighbor. And it's normalized. It's on the street, it's in the school, it's when you get into a taxi cab, it's in the political speech. It's just to insult someone is to call them a Jew. What are you, a Jew, right? So I tell a few of these stories in the book. So, for example, when I was around 8 or 9, we were asked by the teacher to stand up and say what we want to be when we grow up. And so this one, I want to be a soccer player, I want to be a policeman, I want to be a doctor. And a kid gets up and says, when I grow up, I want to be a Jew killer. And everybody laughs and everybody, is hysterically, ebullient and so on. Of course, he knew that I was Jewish. But the teacher didn't take him and, send him out to sensitivity training. It was, it's just part of reality. When I was 5 years old, Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Egyptian pan-Arabist president, had passed away in 1970. I hadn't yet turned 6. And there were these major manifestations, street protests, where thousands and thousands of people were. This often happens in the Middle East. Everybody's lamenting and hitting their heads. Oh God, why? And of course, because a Egyptian president has just died, what better way than to bond collectively by saying death to Jews? Well, here's this 5-year-old boy hiding, cowering in his balcony, as this procession of thousands and thousands of highly fervent people are passing by saying death to Jews. So this is the world that I grew up with.
Wait, no. They were saying, let's go, Brandon.
They're saying, let's go. Exactly. That's,
Did you listen to the
Arabic,
news?
there's a similar phonetic thing in Arabic. Brandon sounds like Jew in Arabic. And so this is basically every day of every minute of every second. Now, then someone comes along and says, but you survived for all those years. Nobody killed you. Well, you survived until they were going to kill you, right? It's like saying, how come the guy died of a heart attack? Earlier that day, he was fine. Well, he was fine until he died of a heart attack, moron, right? So the fact that...
Wait, it's just one more thing. It's like your keys are always the last place you look. Well, why would you keep looking after you found them? Exactly. Yes.
And so basically, my entire life, I lived with the deep, dark secret of being a Jew. And there's a very powerful story that I recount in the Parasitic Mind, where as we cleared the airspace of Lebanon, and when we were literally leaving Lebanon for the last time, after the first year of the Civil War, my mother turned around and put, and I can't remember if it was a Star of David or a high. I think it was a Star of David. She puts it around me. She says, now you can wear this and you don't have to hide your identity anymore. That gives you a sense of what it is to grow up in the Middle East as a Jew, even in progressive Lebanon.
What is your reaction when you see the rise of BDS movements in the universities?
It's grotesque. I mean, it's unbelievable. Again, what upsets me the most is that within the university ecosystem, you are progressive if you believe that, right? It's not viewed as something that's vile, that's, you peel the onion and it's a form of anti-Semitism. People always say, no, I love the Jew. It's Zionism that I hate, right? I mean, it's consistently the argument. By the way, Concordia is a hotbed of this stuff, right? First of all, Concordia, even though, there are many, many things that I love about Concordia, and I say this truly, I mean, I've been there for 27 years. Yeah. Concordia is also referred to as Gaza University because it has a huge Islamic, population, most of whom are perfectly lovely, but some of whom are really not very lovely. I mean, so much so that Benjamin Netanyahu in 2002 was stopped from speaking at Concordia University. So if your student activism is sufficiently strong that you could stop the sitting prime minister of Israel from speaking at your university, you can get the sense of what the ecosystem is like.
Do you think, this is the tough question for you, is there any saving the university system?
I think there is. I don't think that it's all going to go online and people are just going to listen to Gad Saad and Jordan Peterson. I think there's great value in maintaining our universities. I think it really, how long it takes for it to slowly die or rebound is really a function of how quickly people find their spines, grow a pair, and speak out against this nonsense. If, for example, you are a donor that's given tons and tons of money to your university, your alma mater, but then you are fed up with all of the canceling and all the idea pathogen spreading and all the nonsense, and you now say, you continue spreading this garbage, you continue deplatforming people, there goes my $100 million donation. Guess what? The castrated administrators will listen. So there are all sorts of mechanisms by which we can redress the situation very quickly. The problem is that most people truly are so cowardly as to want to avoid being the ones that put their necks on the line. If we all go ahead.
No, but is it cowardly, or is it the fact that the universities did a good job of training them, right? So these alumni are the ones who are contributing. They went through the university system. They were given these ideas that the university promulgates. So it's not a surprise that they're going to be reinforcing those ideas that they were taught.
Fair enough. And I think for many people, what you just said is exactly right. But I know for a fact, based on the emails that I received, thousands, that tons of professors who otherwise walk around saying down, down Trump, he's going to end he's going to end sex, he's going to eat your children. They're the ones who write to me and say, dear Dr. Saad, you're my hero. You've kept me sane all these years, but please don't mention my email if you read this email on your show, right? So there's a lot of speaking from both sides of your mouth. I think that I truly believe that most people have not been parasitized by this, but enough of them have, and they are the most committed and the most vociferous that they can keep the rest of us in check. The analogy that I love to give, Michael, is how many people did it take to alter the New York landscape on 9/11? Was it
Right.
190,000 terrorists? Was it 19 million terrorists? Oh no, it was 19 committed terrorists who woke up that morning and said, it's a really good idea for me to do what I'm about to do. As a matter of fact, God wants me to do it. So it doesn't take tons of blue-haired
Right.
people to keep the rest of us in check. But if the silent majority wakes up and says, you know what, I'm tired of you, you're starting to piss me off, blue-haired person, believe me, the problem will get autocorrected very quickly.
I don't believe you in this sense, because I don't think I'm from the Emma Goldman school, and I don't think the majority is capable of reasoning. The majority is always going to go along with whoever the ruling elite promulgate. This is how very easily the Nazis went from Weimar to Hitler and back again. We see this in the Soviet Union. One things I'm working my upcoming book is when the Stasi from East Germany were closed down and people were exposed to the Stasi files. You could look up who turned you in. We had liked to think, or it would make sense, that most of these people who were informants because, I got your wife, so I either got to turn on your colleague, or I got, so of course you're going to turn the colleague, because whatever. But these people are doing it so voluntarily. And COVID also demonstrated that there's a huge proportion of the population who are bending over backwards to turn in wrongdoers in order to elevate their status and feel a sense of good.
Yeah, fair enough. So am I to take from what you just said that you're not at all optimistic about the future of the university?
Oh, I think I'm optimistic about the future of the universities being destroyed, but it's not going to be via the minority. I think a majority, excuse me. I always think it's a matter of a committed minority is always going to have an astronomical advantage over a dispassionate majority. We see this with rent seeking, right? If I sell anchovies and I can lobby Washington to raise a tax or dollar for a can of anchovies, no one else cares about the anchovies. I do care. I'm going to have that sender's ear. And we see this over and over with politics.
So do you have a theory, or not theory, a call to action? I mean, I've got some in chapter 8 of the
Oh yeah. Seize one sentence. Seize all university endowments and distribute the money as reparations.
To whom?
To African Americans.
You're being sarcastic.
No, not at all.
Give all the money. So I'm trying to see if I can detect any sarcasm or satire.
No sarcasm. Seize all university endowments, Harvard, Yale, all of them. Okay. And this will turn African Americans against the university class.
Oh, I see. Okay, well, Harvard. We can start with Harvard. I can't remember what their last endowment calculation was.
It's 40 like 200. Billion? It's some crazy number. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I had been invited for an assistant professorship. I mean, when I was finishing my PhD to Harvard, and I had made it to the last round. I think there were 6 candidates left for a job at Harvard Business School. And at the time, this is 1993. The Harvard Business School endowment was $1 billion. Like, it had a higher endowment, just the business school, than many countries. It's obscene, the wealth.
Well, we can solve that very quick. We'll do it very quickly, very easily. When do you think things started turning south with universities? Because William F. Buckley, in his book God and Man at Yale, was complaining about this sort of stuff in the early 50s already.
Yeah, so I would say certainly around then. Some of the idea pathogens can be dated even further back. So, for example, cultural relativism,
yes,
which is one of those idea pathogens. And by the way, I'm not sure if we'll have time to speak about them, but examples of idea pathogens: postmodernism, cultural relativism, social constructivism, biophobia. Those are all examples of idea pathogens that I discuss in the book. Well, cultural relativism originally began nearly about 100 years ago by Franz Boas, actually a Jewish anthropologist at Columbia University, who then trained a whole generation of subsequent anthropologists, most famously Margaret Mead
and Zora Neale Hurston.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. And about there's no such thing as a universal human nature. There are no universal phenomena. Everything is constrained by the idiosyncratic realities of a particular culture. And again, remember earlier I mentioned about how it all starts with sort of trying to protect a noble cause. Well, that came from the desire to not have biology being misused in the study of human affairs, right? Because you originally had the social Darwinists, even though they had nothing to do with Darwin.
Right. So
the British class elitists who said, hey, we're the upper class, you're the lower class. If you die out because we don't invest in you, hey, that's just Darwinians. Who cares? Then, of course, the Nazis came along and said, hey, there's a natural struggle between classes. We're the Aryans, you're the Jews, you lose. Hey, that's Darwinian. Eugenicists did the same thing. Hey, that's Darwinian. It had nothing to do with Darwin, but we usurped Darwin for our own nefarious goals. And so these anthropologists said, hey, we've got to be able to protect against that. So let's create 100 years of worth of knowledge built on complete quicksand of bullshit, hopefully that will preclude us from making those same mistakes again. But to me, that is such an insanely myopic view of how to construct knowledge, because if that were the way to go about it, then we should create a new way of studying physics so that we can preclude us from building the atomic bomb. Right?
Yeah.
That's what you did with Lysenkoism in
Yeah.
the Soviet Union, right? I want genetic theory to be in line with Marxism. Then if 30 million people have to die of famine, so be it, but my theory remains pure. It's insane.
Yeah. I remember freshman year economics. My teacher was she was a great teacher, by the way. It didn't really come through in her class, but she co-authored a textbook, and she was of the belief that because the laws of economics were discovered by men, they were inherently sexist and needed to be rediscovered by women. And things like supply and demand, to apply gender to them, it just seems so bonkers. You have to be really, really smart to be able to think in that way. I think it takes such a kind of intelligence to kind of, manipulate the brain to force these kind of outcomes.
Indeed.
Dr. Saad, we're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this interview?
Your affable nature, the fact that we can talk about very serious things while maintaining a smile on the face. I always think that life is a playground. That's actually one of the titles of chapters of my next book. So I can deal with deadly serious issues without ever losing my smile. And so to the extent that you share that predisposition, that's probably the favorite part.
You are welcome.